Welcome to Miss Martin Muses and night 5 of Pub Crawl. We are late into the night, and we have none other than from Exploring Tolkien, the OneRing.com, Jonathan.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, well, it's great having you here. I was telling you backstage how I've been watching a lot of your content, loving it, of course. But maybe you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and how did you come up with all these Tolkien content?
Well, my name's Jonathan. We started the OneRing.com in 1999. It was me and another guy. He's not involved anymore. But yeah, it's a funny story. So we'll go back a little further. I read The Lord of the Rings when I was in 7th grade. Finished the books in about a week. Really, it's one book. Let's just be clear. It's not really 3 books. Everybody likes to say it's 3 books, but I have more copies of the single volumes because I just love, I don't know. I love the single volumes. Anyway, so I finished it all. And from that moment, once I finished it, I remember it was, my dad's a pastor, was a pastor. And I finished it while I was in church. So
Nice.
I don't know, but it was like reading a holy book, kind of, sort of. But I finished it and I read the appendices and I'm like, I want more. Like I couldn't get enough of these kinds of stories. And so I went on to read, everything that was out there. And I guess maybe this was the golden age of sort of fantasy that you had. And there were some really horrible ones. Like I despise Terry Brooks. I cannot stand his works. I enjoyed other ones, like even the original Wizard of Earthsea series by Ursula Le Guin. I read everything. Chronicles of Thomas Covenant the Unbeliever. Those I found interesting, if a little more adult than my 8-year-old or eighth grade brain probably should have been reading. But I did read all that, and I was on a quest, like to find like this like I want more of these kinds of stories, and nothing ever satisfied. And read the Silmarillion. Couldn't really, like, at that point, like I was not ready for that kind of depth of like just where I want to understand the whole of Tolkien's world. I wanted to experience Middle Earth in a story again, and there was nothing really out there. And so for years, I got an English literature degree, and then in 1999, I got involved with the folks who were lining up for the premiere of The Phantom Menace at Grauman's Chinese Theater on Hollywood Boulevard. And these were people we did 6 weeks of a lineup, I think it was. And it wasn't like you lined up all 6 weeks straight. You actually would clock in, you'd stay there for 24, 48 hours, whatever. You'd have a tent, you'd sleep on the sidewalk, quite literally in a tent, and you'd gain time. I think you had to be there the last 2 or 3 nights straight in order to get in. But yeah, I was like the 30th person or 40th person in line there, something like that. I feel like I had like 240 hours. In any case, it was at that point that I was like, I want to make a website, because it was all about a website, countingdown.com. We were experiencing all these new things. And so it was right then that I was like, all right, well, let's start this website. And so I registered the OneRing.com.
Yes.
Not
the other one.
And I regret to this day that I didn't register the .net, but they were $70 then, and I was a starving student. Couldn't afford another $70 to buy a domain, so I did, and we've been at that domain ever since. We did have TolkienOnline.com for a while until the Tolkien estate essentially threatened us with a lawsuit right after the movies came out. We had it for years. We used it, actually, TolkienOnline.com, but then they threatened us with a lawsuit, and they said, we need to take the money that you made off the website in the last few years. And we said, we're like, we didn't make any money. And then they took it anyway. So we had that too. But we've been really at the OneRing.com since 1999. It's the 25th anniversary. I didn't even think about that. So that was how the website got started. We were always known as the purists, right? We had a very popular message boards, 50 to 60,000 people a day, a few million posts on it, and plenty of discussions. And yeah, it was kind of the heyday of Tolkien fandom, I would say, back in the day. Before social media, you could really just be involved in your community and get to know other people, like-minded people, or people who at least loved the kind of cultural events and cultural foundations that we all could enjoy together. So anyway, so that was where we started. That was where I started the OneRing.com.
Wow. Well, that's amazing. We all have our own individual stories. I was The Hobbit as a little girl. The Hobbit was the first book that I read, because that's kind of what kids read. And from school, I got it from my brother. And then I read Lord of the Rings as a young adult, and then just couldn't stop in eating all this letters and the literature and the scholarship. It's been a good 25 to 30 years of that, and I still feel like I've only scratched the surface of the thing. But
Oh, goodness,
speaking
yeah.
speaking of Tolkien, his world, and all of that, we are meeting in the pub today. It is none other than the Golden Perch. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this?
Well, the Golden Perch is never visited in the Lord of the Rings. However, it is the place that Pippin wanted to go on the way to Bree, and they ended up, I believe, having to stop by Farmer Maggots instead. But he's like, he said, this is the quote I have from him. This is where we're talking about, they can't do, they can't have any delays, or because Pippin's arguing, that they shouldn't take the shortcut to Bree, and he says, shortcuts make long delays. The country is rough around here, and there are bogs and all kinds of difficulties down in the marsh. I know the land in these parts, and if you're worrying about Black Riders, I can't see that it's any worse meeting them on the road than in a wood or a field. And then Frodo says to him, it is less easy to find people in the woods and fields, and if you are supposed to be on the road, there is some chance that you will be looked for on the road and not off it. All right, said Pippin, I will follow you into every bog and ditch, but it is hard. I had counted on passing the Golden Perch at stock before sundown, the best beer in the East Farthing, or used to be. It is a long time since I tasted it. And then Frodo says, shortcuts make long delays. That settles it, but inns make longer ones. At all costs, we must keep you away from the Golden Perch. We want to get Buckleberry before dark. So anyway, yeah, it's the best beer in the East Farthing. And I thought, hey, this is a great place to meet.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. I swear someone the Tolkien estate needs to market some of that kind of stuff, like, and have that as the catchphrase. But goodness knows what's going on with them. But I do know from what you have said, yes, they keep it all very tight to their fist, which is understandable. But then they make some, if you will, questionable issues. But hello, look, there's Snortipoop also talking about The Hobbit. We have Zax, we have loads of people in here. Thank you. If y'all have any questions, please feel free to do so. And he says, at least they had good beer at Farmer Maggot, says Snortipoopus True.
That is true.
That's true.
They did have that, but it was not the best beer in the East Farthing. Sorry to break it to you.
Yeah, it was not indeed. Well, I love it that you said about being a Tolkien purist. So you were called that even back in the day. Now, nowadays, of course, people that like the works of Tolkien usually get a lot of garbage because of what's going on right now. But maybe talk a little bit about being a Tolkien purist back in the days of Peter Jackson.
Well, it was interesting because there were so many people, right? I think there were more. Put it this way: there felt like there was a more of a community of Tolkien purists than there are now, in the sense that it wasn't affected by outside forces like Guy Ladriel, for instance, right? When you start changing characters so dramatically to fit the modern narrative, that wasn't a discussion we were having back then in the turn of the millennium. The discussion was, how close are you going to get to Tolkien? And so the big arguments weren't about, oh, look, like, I mean, sure, Arwen, like, battling, that was a big argument. But the bigger argument really was, like, look how they changed Aragorn. Like, why is Saruman dying on a round, spiky wheelie dealy, which got the acronym RSWD for the longest time in our forums, where he falls off Orthanc and he lands on some sort of spiky wheel in the water that nobody really knows what it does, but in any case, probably a torture device for the orcs. And so we had these discussions, but you know what? No, like, there wasn't animosity, and there were some people who like. There are people who will say, like, oh, there was all this discussion about Ian McKellen being gay, and I'm like, you know what? You could have gone to our message boards. They went offline like a year and a half ago, the archive of them, but there was no discussion anywhere on the pure sites about that worried about that. It was all about how close they're hewing to Tolkien, because we all understand an actor can act, and we expect them to be somebody completely different than who they are in set, and who they are in real life doesn't really matter as long as they're acting well. So yeah, and the other nice thing about it is that New Line Cinema was very, very accommodating, right? They were very, like, I talked to them on the phone a number of times. I talked to Orlando Bloom. I talked to a couple of the people. I never talked to Peter Jackson other than in an interview setting. But they all were engaging, right? They didn't care if the fandom was positive or critical. they were like, you know what, like maybe it was keep your friends close and keep your enemies closer kind of thing. But
Mhm.
they invited us, they had us, they sent us their stuff, they brought us in for the previews, for trailers. We did so one of the first things we did as a community of people was when the first trailer for the Fellowship of the Ring was released before the movie. Oh gosh, it's a movie about the Cuban Missile Crisis. Was it something like 12 days, something like that?
Uh,
Uh,
Maybe 13 days. I remember
13
that,
days.
yes. I
Yes.
remember. It was yeah.
Yeah, and so we actually waited overnight in a theater in Hollywood. I think it was in Hollywood, probably North Hollywood, and just to see the trailer. And so some people had tents, but New Line Cinema, they brought us donuts. They brought us a bunch of boxes of Krispy Kreme donuts. There were like 25 or 30 of us waiting there, and it was sort of like engaging the fans in a really friendly, good way, and like keeping the conversation going. Something we don't really do these days. And I will say, like, I don't. Sure, I'm super critical of the Rings of Power. I'm super critical of all the things, but it's because they're setting out the message before they're telling us the story, right? And so, for
Mhm.
instance, in War of the Rohirrim, they're setting out the message that what Tolkien wrote isn't good enough, and so we are going to put Hera, some unnamed character, who only has one line in the entire story about Helm Hammerhand. We're going to make her the focal point of this here, and we can be critical of that, but they don't even engage. Like they just write us all off. And for the thousands of people that listen to the podcast, and for the tens of thousands that watch the videos about the Rings of Power, like they just don't want to engage anymore. And that's kind of sad to me. And
Mhm.
maybe it makes my response a little bit more critical of them. But it was a different time. There we could be critical without being mean, and they could take the criticism without saying it's racism, it's misogyny, it's something that is a personal attack. That wasn't the criticism back then. So it was a totally different time. There was no social media, right? And so social media
Mhm.
tends to amplify all that kind of discussion, all those kinds of voices that are calling that out, and the memes get bigger and the reposts go further. So yeah, different time, and I kind of miss that because you could have
Mhm.
easier discussions.
Yeah, I had an experience with the creators of the show Once Upon a Time, the same thing. There
Mm,
was a lot of very good rapport. They seemed to have a little more respect for the fans, even when you didn't agree. So I'll never say anything bad
yeah.
about them, for example, Adam Horowitz. But I think that's very curious because well, we don't want to talk about a particular website, but there are some people that do get to be
Mm.
friendly with them. And I think part of it is because now it's like maybe
Look,
people feel
the
like they
I will
need
say
to
the Wondering. Look, I don't care. The Wondering.net has
submit.
carried water for all of them all the time, and they're totally fine with it. I mean, I'm not original guys who did the Wondering.net are not there anymore. It's mostly a couple other guys who I know too. I went to their Hollywood party once. They invited me to it. Like I was on okay terms with them. But they're all about the movies more so than the books, and we're all about the books more so than the movies. And I
Mhm,
understand that, and they understand that. But I mean, we interview authors who love anything that comes out of Tolkien. Any new derivation of what Tolkien created is a wonderful thing. Nick Groom, who wrote the book Tolkien in the 21st century, we interviewed him last year. It's a book that came out, and it's an interesting book. He loves any derivation of Tolkien, just like sites like the Wondering.net love any derivation of Tolkien. I am far more critical. I mean, he said that his favorite character was in all of Middle Earth, through all the incarnations of Middle Earth, was Toriel from the Hobbit, the
oh,
movie. And so I was I just told him, like, well, we're not going to ever agree on that, but I appreciate you being honest about it.
yeah,
But I don't, I look, here's my thing. It's like, if Tolkien spent an entire lifetime creating a world that has touched tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people, maybe a billion people at this point, probably. And there's a reason for that, is because it's excellent. And he worried about the details, and he created an engaging world with engaging characters. And if you start toying with that, you start ruining the recipe. You start ruining um, the the interlocking pieces that holds it all together. And that's what we're getting now. They don't understand that, like, it's important to actually be true to it, because that's what made it excellent. But they
mhm,
believe that their excellence is more in the message than in the story, and it's disappointing, because I don't
yeah,
know if it's
and
ever going to change.
And I think that they fundamentally misunderstood what makes Tolkien great. They thought if you just take a character, a woman, and call her Galadriel, well, all the fans are going to come. Look how they all were excited about the other movies. And
Oh
not so much
yeah.
about The Hobbit, but that's another
No.
story too. But it was, they think, oh, we'll just put Lord of the Rings on and everyone will flock to it. They don't
Yeah.
understand, first of all, what fantasy is, but especially they don't understand the unique place that Tolkien has in what he accomplished. It's a masterpiece. He was
Yeah.
considered the author of the century, and there are so many people that were scratching their heads. Why is this person a fantasy author? You know, stupid little hobbits. Why is that the author of the century? And Tom Shippey did a great book, of course, defending it. But there's a reason, because it is the friggin' author of the century. I have
Mm-hmm.
yet to read, very rarely do I read any literature that just knocks my socks off. And
Mm-hmm.
still,
Mm-hmm.
after all these years, 20 years, 25 years, 30 years afterwards, it's it's ingenious. And I think that what you pointed at was how good this
Mm-hmm.
thing
Mm-hmm.
is.
Mm-hmm.
And you just read the at the Battle of Palinor Fields, for example, and it's just you're transported. You're literally in Middle Earth when you read it.
Yeah. To me, people I will ask me oftentimes, what is your favorite character in Middle Earth? I'm like, kind of Middle Earth is my favorite character. The world that he created.
Ooh.
The characters are good, like specific characters, but the depth and breadth, particularly with how much of the history of Middle Earth I know now, 25 years after I started the site, because I think I'd read the Silmarillion once when I started the site, and then I listened to it and I really got into it after that, and then I did more. And at this point, once you go through, like we're doing on our podcast, Exploring Tolkien, once you go through uh, books like that and Unfinished Tales in such detail, and you talk about it with someone, you get feedback from people, you really start to understand and get into it. And
Mhm.
his meticulous detail in Middle Earth and in the history and how he created it all is what keeps drawing me in. And so people ask me, well, why is your favorite story outside of Lord of the Rings? Why is your favorite story The Children of Hurin? I don't know if you've read The Children of Hurin, but it's a
Mhm.
kind of it's a brutal story. It's,
I love it.
there is loss, there is uh disgusting relationships, there
Mhm.
is friends killing each other, right? There's so many good things in there that are brutal, and that a lot of people are like, how can you like that? I'm like, I don't know, because it adds so much to to what Middle Earth is, that it's not just like the Rings of Power will say, it's different races coming together to succeed. I'm like, well, no, it's not. Like Tolkien said,
Mm-mm.
it's more of a story of the long, unending march to destruction, and this is just a part of it. And sure, you can have highlights and you can have um, battles won until the final battle, but there is death, destruction, and despair in it. And for some reason, I'm there for it in Middle Earth.
Oh, yeah. Well, Tolkien himself, in our world, he said human history is one long defeat.
Yeah,
And
true. Yeah.
yeah, and when people, I think they obviously show they have not read the works. They think, oh, it's just a fantasy about, people, and then they all live happily ever after and all that. It's like, no, they don't. Frodo was completely broken at the end of it. Now, the happy ending to a certain degree is going into the West and all of that, and
Mhm.
part of the hope of eternal life, which Tolkien obviously had in his real life. But yes, you are correct. It's brutal, and I love the Children of Ren.
Yeah, me
I
too.
just can't get enough of it. I mean, because I read it, and the part in the Silmarillion and the book there that it just is such a tragedy, and you really feel for the people. It's very Greek
Mm.
mythology.
Yeah. Yeah. We're
Yeah.
we're reading The Hobbit. We're doing a very deliberate, intense read through of The Hobbit right now. Michael and I, who's co-host
Mhm.
on the podcast, and we were like, okay, we're gonna do The Hobbit now, and then right after that, we're gonna go to The Children of Hurin. And I'm like, oh
Yes.
man, what a, like, talk about a 90-degree hard left turn into some totally different place for where Tolkien was. But it'll show us where Tolkien wrote. Really, The Hobbit started out as a story for his children, and it really still is a children's story in the way that he wrote it, even though he did try rewrite
Mhm.
and that didn't work. But The Children of Hurin is that, like you said, the Greek tragedy. It is that place um where his adult mind would go to when seeing into the corners of Middle Earth.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I like that even better. I like that even better than The Hobbit.
Yes, and it gives truth to the lie that it, as you said, it's that it's for children or for basement dwellers. Can't stand that
Yeah, fantasy
thing.
is not for children.
Yeah, it's the greatest literature. Now, every now and then you'll see this on different sides of people that want to criticize the original source material, maybe in defense of Rings of Power or something. They will say that things like the Children of Hurin or even the Silmarillion itself, because it wasn't published during his lifetime, that it is not really truly Tolkien or part of his legendarium. I didn't know if you wanted to address that.
Yeah, well, it's true. Tolkien only published 3 actual books in his lifetime, which is The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and The Adventures of Tom Bombadil.
Mhm.
I think the Tolkien Reader came out after he passed. I can't remember, but three official books that were published. And so he always wanted, number one, he always wanted to publish the Silmarillion. That was
Mhm.
something that he always would hope for. In fact, when he was asked to create the pardon me, to write the sequel to The Hobbit, he said, "How about the Silmarillion?" And he gave them some of it, and they're like, "No." Rainer Unknown, who was the publisher, was like, "It's not going to work. The people want more hobbits. They don't want high tales and despair." So so he wrote The Lord of the Rings instead. But he had so many notes. His problem was always he couldn't finish anything. It was really difficult for him to finish. And he even said, if it wasn't for C.S. Lewis, I never would have finished The Lord of the Rings. Maybe that's because he was far too self-critical, or that he always would want to go back and rework it. But that doesn't make what he actually wrote less a part of his I don't know, what's his library, right? So
Yeah. It's
the Children of
legendarium.
Hurin,
Yeah.
yeah, his legendary. So the Children of Hurin, sure, it is taken together from his notes and put together in a way that Christopher Tolkien, who, if you're going to have anybody do it, Christopher Tolkien is the right guy to do it, because all he ever did in his entire life is take his father's work, understand it, and put it together in a more readable format. I mean, he did that from 1972 until he passed away a few years ago. So what are we talking? 50 years, right? And which is approaching how long his father did it, since he was 20 till he died, until he was 70 or 17, 14, 15. How old was he? He was 20, about 20 years old, I guess, when he started really doing it. And so yeah, it is Tolkien, and you read it and you can see some of it. He did have to take some notes and find the right places and put them together, but and in various ways it's not it is not his words precisely, because they had to bring it together. But the Children of Hurin, there's a lot there. I think maybe my favorite story outside of those two, actually, is if you go into Unfinished Tales, and we spent 7 weeks doing the story of Aldarion and Erendis, the mariner's wife. It's in Unfinished Tales. It's I don't know, like 60 or 70 pages in there, 50, 60, 70, somewhere, something like that. But it's a very adult story of Numenor. And I really wish he would have finished it. It stops kind of in the middle of when the elves start getting involved. They're not coming for the jobs of the people of Numenor. They actually look for help.
No, please, no. That hurts so badly.
Yeah, no, it's worth it. Now, I will say, I have the 12 copies of all the different histories of Middle Earth. There, is it 13 now? I don't even remember. There's so many. They all came out when I was still young, and those can be so boring, because it's sort of like, well, in the original version of Beren and Luthien, this is the way they wrote. Like, you go through all the different notes, and then Christopher Tolkien puts his notes in, and it's really scholarly and it's really in depth. And there are good parts to it. There are good short bits in them, but sometimes it's really hard to get through it all. The People of Middle Earth is a great version of it. The Peoples of Middle Earth is good. Sauron Defeated isn't bad. The first book of Lost Tales, it's interesting to see where he all started it from, but it's really more scholarly than it is interesting. That's why I'd say, stick with the Children of Hurin, stick with Fall of Gondolin, stick with, if you want to, just stick with the prose in Beren and Luthien. These are all the books that you can get. Unfinished Tales has a lot of good stuff, particularly if you're wondering about how did we find out about the death of Isildur, and how the ring was lost and all that sort of stuff. Like, there's some great stories in there, and those ones are very much close to what Tolkien originally wrote in his notes. But even he was never satisfied, right? So he tried to rewrite The Hobbit in 1960, and he got through 3 chapters, 3 and a bit of a chapter, I think. And it's more like the Lord of the Rings, but it loses a lot of its charm. And so he was never like he never finished anything. And even if he lived to, another 30 years, I don't think he ever would have really finished the cosmology of Middle Earth. He would have never really finished the Silmarillion. Because he couldn't stop working on it, and he would work on it whenever he could. He'd find edges of newspapers and backs of papers that he still was that were nearby in order to put thoughts down. But he never really finished.
Mhm. Yeah, and I have found that some people try then to use that as an excuse, like they twist it and say, "Well,
Oh,
he even was rewriting and revising it, and so what we're doing, maybe it's in the spirit of Tolkien."
yeah, he had the right to revise it. It was his story. It's not your story. You can't go in and say like since Peter Benchley was revising Jaws for the 3 weeks up before it was published, and I'm going to go in and revise it too. I didn't like how it ended. I'm going to go in and change it. No, you can't do that. It's not your right. You're not the author. And since we have so much of what Tolkien wrote, right, to have a guy who published 3 books in his lifetime, but yet we've gotten, I don't know, 4 other full-length books. Yeah. So, and then the Unfinished Tales and all the histories of Middle Earth. Even we recently, 10 years ago, we found that poem that was published in a school's journal in the mid 30s. Like, there's so much out there, but you don't have the right, in my opinion, to go in and
Mhm,
change Tolkien. I don't mind so much, honestly. I don't mind so much adding things. Like if there was, if you're doing the Rings of Power, obviously there's not enough information for a super long series, but you have to hold true to what Tolkien wrote, or else you're losing, like I said, all those interlocking pieces, all the ability, all his wordsmithing, the depth of the characters. It's rewritten for, as they like to say, modern audiences, so that people get it better. But it's changing Tolkien, and when you change the character, when you make Galadriel into the friggin' commander of the Northern
mhm,
armies, when you change Elrond into a what did they call him, a politician architect? Those were their exact words. Uh, you are changing Tolkien. If you took Elrond and Galadriel and gave them a discussion, because they certainly were interacting and had things to say, and you created a discussion out of that was within the characters there that Tolkien wrote, that's fine. But when you change the character, when you change the world, when you have Elrond go from Eregion to Moria in an afternoon in his large window drapes that he wears, it's so unrealistic. It just changes Tolkien, and that's what I hate. The adding so much, I don't mind, because there is, I think, a place for that if you're telling a wider story, but it has to
mhm.
be within what he wrote, within the characters that he created, and that's what that's the way that I feel about it. So I didn't
It
mind some of the stuff that was added to Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings.
Mhm.
But I hated the changes. The changes were really what drove me crazy. Um,
Yes,
yeah.
that's a very good way of putting it. I'm forever gonna be mad about Faramir. Do you know what my favorite character is? Yes, it is Faramir. That's why it made me mad versus, the
Yeah.
little
Yeah.
added things, because they fundamentally changed, like, a character who Tolkien himself said was the most like him, and he has a very
Mhm.
good reason to be there. So, I don't sit around and worship at the altar of Peter Jackson, and I'm concerned actually about this hunt for Gollum that's supposed to be coming up.
Oh, man. That's the movie
Mhm.
everybody was asking for. We wanted to know, how did Aragorn torture Gollum on his way back to Thranduil?
Yes.
Sort of like,
It's
he
like,
literally
"Damn it."
says he starves him and tortures him essentially, and you're like, "Oh, this is not." I don't even know where. Like, we know what the end of the story is. Why are you telling us the worst part, the part where the guy gets tortured, who we're supposed to have a little bit of pity for, who you essentially in the movies you're working towards a place where we end up having pity for such a broken and horrible character, which we do in the end.
Mhm.
But oh man, I don't know. This is not the movie
Watch
we wanted.
watch them do it if they have Aragorn doing all those torturing. Watch them make it, therefore, white man bad.
No, 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 no.
This is why we
Oh my
shouldn't
goodness.
have a king. He tortured somebody.
Yeah.
I don't know. Oh dear.
Uh,
And but yeah, and when you I know it's not the same, but it's like looking at the Bible and saying, "Well, Jesus should have done something a little different, and so I'm just gonna change it up." It's like, "No, no, you don't touch the Bible, you don't touch holy books." And you definitely don't do that to someone who's passed away. I mean, Tolkien is dead. He died a few years before I was born.
Yeah.
What it's like it's done. This is his work, his creation.
Mhm.
Because in a way, they
Mhm.
are creators. They're sub creators. And dang it, Tolkien even talks about it. Everyone needs to read his essays, his on fairy tales, and
Yeah.
just the beauty of the mythology that he created, and that's just not something you can go and tamper with. And I think you mentioned it in your video about the recent article of the creators of Rings of Power. The way it was me, 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 me. We want to do that.
Mhm.
That this is a story we want to tell. And it's like, how about Tolkien? What about
I know.
Tolkien?
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. And even George R. R. Martin said in a recent blog post of his, because all he does is write blogs and not books these days.
Uh-huh.
He said he said that 999 out of 1,000 remakes fail, or of other creators taking somebody's original work and saying, I can make this better. That almost never works, right?
Mhm.
0.001%, right? There's no time that this actually works. And so why not go with what has already been successful and proven? But here's the thing. Is that I've been thinking, for the last few years, I've thought about this a lot. Why is it that we get so much bad entertainment, so many bad movies? Why is it that all we get is remakes?
Mhm.
And I think it comes down to nobody has actually experienced real pain or real joy, because you can only, like what Tolkien did, what C.S. Lewis, what these great authors, what Ray Bradbury, right? They all experienced such utter pain and loss and destruction and hopelessness and hope. They knew what it was like, and to try to put that into words is what gave them such power. But we live in a time where these writers, I hate to call them that, but these writers who bring things like the Rings of Power or the Hunt for Gollum or now the War of the Rohirrim in, is they've learned that the biggest struggle in their lives is going to be the patriarchy, or it's it's white supremacy that doesn't exist here in America anymore, or it's what's the term that they use, not starvation, it's food insecurity, right? We get these words. And so those are the biggest problems. And what is the greatest thing that you can have? It's doing what you want to. That's the hope that you have. It's sitting at home and playing video games, or it's, eating your favorite food. The hope is like I'm going to create a better world for my children. That's what Tolkien and Lewis and these other great writers came out of in the death and despair of the early and mid 20th and even the later 20th century, when they're talking about Vietnam and when the Cold War and the fall of the Berlin Wall. Right, there are people that lived in hopelessness and loss, but yet these people that come out of schools now are taught that the greatest pain in the world is the pain that you experience, because you're not
Mhm.
part of the, you don't have the clout of the patriarchy behind you in order to succeed. And it's so small. So when you get, that's why Hera, the unnamed character of the daughter of Helm Hammerhand, is the primary character in the Rings of Power, or no, sorry,
Mhm.
in the other
Oh,
crappy thing, the War of the Rohirrim, because she has to fight against the patriarchy, and that's the greatest evil to fight against. It's not actually evil. That's the thing that
yes.
she's fighting against, right? So that's why she has to be the main character. So she has to be the one to overcome. And what's she really overcoming? She's not going to be really overcoming the evil that took over Rohan and Freka's son Wolf, who killed her brother. That's not really the evil. The evil she's fighting is that she's been under the foot of the patriarchy. She hasn't been allowed to carry that big, huge, heavy sword because she's, a girl, and girls don't do important things apparently in their mind, when really women do the most important thing, and that's bear and raise children, of creating
Mhm.
the next generation of people, right? So, but that's all they know. This is the big giant pain in the world that they must experience, is the whatever it ends up being, whatever the message they want to get out. Here, I think it's the patriarchy. They like Helm is going to come across as a man who doesn't believe his daughter can do anything. And they said, well, we did it with Eowyn. I'm like, yeah, but guess what Eowyn did in the end too? She married Faramir. Like, she
Yeah.
didn't like go off and carry a sword and become the commander of the northern armies.
No,
Back then,
they both
Star.
decided that they were gonna she was gonna be a healer, and they were gonna go to Ithilien and grow a
Right.
garden, and all will grow if the white lady comes, and I love that chapter so much. Yes, it's a beautiful ending for Eowyn, but they would say, of course, that that's because Tolkien is such a sexist. The only thing he could see is that
Yeah.
she could become a wife at the end, even though she got to fight, and that was a complete misunderstanding of what he was trying to convey. It's just
Yeah.
absurd.
Yeah, and that what they're saying is they're probably going to say like they're just finishing Eowyn's story here in the War of the Ring. It's really what Eowyn would have been if she could have been that in the Lord of the Rings. If Tolkien were more modern and forward looking and wasn't such a product of the patriarchy of his time.
Yeah, yeah. If Tolkien lived today, this is what he would have done, and it's
Oh
like,
gosh, I hate that
no,
word.
he wouldn't have complete.
No,
Well, and
no.
I always tell people, please read his letters because what he has to say about his inspiration for Galadriel and it's just. But I think that the reason why they don't understand it is because they don't really live in a world like you said. They haven't experienced true evil, so they don't know the difference between good and evil because that's
Right.
part of the appeal of Tolkien's story. It was, we're in a battle of principalities, if you will, to bring in the,
Agreed.
religion obviously is in
Yeah.
the work, though not explicitly. You see Tolkien's faith through it all. It's like, listen, this is, archangels versus other archangels and things on the spirit realm as well. And I find it very telling that with Sauron, they're trying to like humanize him and make him in emo goodness knows what. And it's like because they can't say that something is evil. And because they can't say something is evil,
Right.
they don't know how to say what is good.
Right. Well, and they don't believe that there is true evil. Right. They
Mhm.
believe that we're all just a product of our circumstances. So whereas like in our world today, not to get too political, but I don't mind getting
Mhm.
too political these days anymore. That that they'll say poverty causes crime when the real fact is crime causes poverty. It's not the other way around. And so like evil causes the human condition to fall into disrepair. That's why I will when we're talking about faith and what I believe God did for us on the cross is that he right
Mhm.
he made you realize that if you're on a path to evil, like setting you free isn't like doing whatever you want to. Setting you free is understanding that pursuing the path of evil leads to more chains. And just like, crime
Yeah.
causes poverty, that leads to more chains. And so we live in a world where, they believe the inverse of what is actually true because they don't believe in actual absolute right and wrong and absolute the absolute understanding of I don't know where I was going with that.
Well,
I was going to
no,
say
but
something.
no, I got you. Sometimes it's very hard to put into words, but because they don't understand, I'll say this. I'll go there because they don't understand faith. They can't understand Tolkien and what
Oh
he's doing.
yeah. Yeah, and it's like that whole line of I don't know if you watched The Rings of Power, or just hate watched it like so many people did in the videos we had. But there's the line, there's a between Elendil, is it Elendil? It's Elendil, yeah, right? Yeah,
I always
Elendil
call
and
him not before it.
yeah, not
It's not
Elendil
the real.
and not Muriel on their return trip to Numenor after she loses her eyesight and the giant steam volcano is magically built, not magically, but stupidly built from anyway. So
Mhm.
they're on a boat and they're talking about faith, right? Well, faith is we need to hold together for faith. I don't remember their whole lines because they were so inane and dumb. But they talk about faith, but faith in what? They never even mention what they are faithful to, faithful for. Are they
Mhm.
faithful to each other? Are they faithful to the Numenor, to his son? Like they never mention it. When in the books, faithful means being faithful to God, to Iluvatar in the
Mhm.
books, being faithful to the gift that was given to them by the all-powerful being in the universe that deserves their worship and that had their worship. And the only
Mhm.
place that Tolkien even wrote about it was in Numenor, but they completely ignore that in the movies and then just use the word faith as if it actually means anything. But if you remove what the focus of faith is, then faith has no meaning anymore. But they'll just throw it
Precisely.
up.
Oh gosh, you said it. Well, and part of the deception of Sauron is he's basically going to get like some big satanic thing going on in
Yeah,
there. But
right.
yeah, I bet you $1,000 million though they're not going to do it. They're not going to
No,
have that.
no, he's too handsome. We
Yeah.
can't have a hot guy doing that. No, but yeah, they won't do. I mean, they're already out of it. The biggest problem is what? It's the elves coming for their jobs, right?
Yeah.
That's the reason they hate Galadriel.
Yeah.
And it does like because she's never one. Of course, remember she's never ever there. She never goes to Numenor in Tolkien stories. The only one that does is Sauron, and he simply bows the knee to the Numenorians because he realizes I can't fight against this here. So let's just use my cunning in order to get under their skin, or to essentially sway the king to away from Iluvatar and away from the worship of Eru, and he does, right. So they build a new altar, they have sacrifices, they burn the tree on it, they never go to the Menel Tarma, which is the big peak in order that the king would go to once a year to worship, and so yeah, and so he changes Numenor in the span of I don't remember how many years, decades, but that's how he changes it. He doesn't change it by finding Galadriel in the middle of an ocean and bringing Galadriel to Numenor and then by making them worry about jobs.
Yeah. Oh my
Man,
gosh.
this show, it's here's the thing. If this is the story you wanted to tell, fine, tell it, but don't tell it in a world that it doesn't actually make any sense in. Right? You could have told this story, and it might have been far better if you created it on your own without having to saddle it with for lack of a better term, with the baggage of Tolkien, which means you're trying to give something that you're trying to package. What's the best analogy? You're trying to spray some. You're trying to. You're I don't know. You're putting perfume on a rotten egg, right? You can still smell
Yeah.
the rotten egg, right? It's just it comes through that way, and so they can't do it, but they can't even do it well, right? They can't even technically do it well. It was so poorly written. It was so poorly constructed. The scenes and the sets were so small, and so I mean, it looked like they were 3D printed. A lot of the armor, and were printed on. It was just poorly done.
Yeah.
But
Well,
they figured, like you said earlier, they figure you throw the name Galadriel into it, and oh well, then we're all gonna like it.
yeah, because they don't understand Tolkien, and it's very telling that the creators of the Rings of Power, the showrunners, they don't have a lot of experience. They don't have a lot on their resume, and I think
Hmm.
that it shows.
Yeah, just to remember, just like War of the Rohirrim. You know who wrote that?
Philip Boyne's daughter.
Yes. A lot of people don't realize this because he's Gittins. Phoebe Gittins, I think, is her. Maybe she's married or something, but that's her name, and nobody realizes like, oh, it's nepotism. Oh, she's
Mhm.
gonna write it. So it's just she doesn't know what she's doing. Like, it's just
Yeah,
she doesn't have any experience. Her biggest experience was playing a Hobbit kid in the Lord of the Rings, apparently.
yes, precisely. Well, before we go into our pub game, the Rule 7, I always give, if there's anything that maybe you'd like to say about the topic and the like that you haven't addressed yet, this is where I just hand over the microphone and say, go. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
I always hope for better renditions of Tolkien. And if you're gonna go all in and not making it Tolkien, go all in and just don't even worry. Like sort of what is the video games that came out 10 years ago or so? Shadow of Mordor, Shadow of War.
Mhm,
I actually played some of that. It was well done. It was okay. Technically, they were excellent, right? This is what happened. This is like the inverse of the Rings of Power. Technically, it was excellent. It was fun. It was well done. And so you can, I realized, okay, this really is just fan fiction, but at least it's kind of well done. And I can assume that, they were putting their all into this part of it and then didn't really care about the Tolkien thing, whatever.
mhm,
And so I kind of enjoyed that and I was able to separate it. But if you're gonna do Tolkien and it's you're rewriting him and it's poorly done, you'll never get anywhere. So I do like as a fan of Tolkien, I do long for great retellings of his stories. I do because I think it's really interesting to see how somebody else takes it.
mhm,
Not in dramatic ways where you're putting Galadriel as a commander. Again, this is my least favorite. Just start with this: commander of the Northern Armies, or putting Arwen at Helm's Deep, like what Peter Jackson tried to do, and thankfully never put that in the edit. But I do enjoy like other renditions of Tolkien, but it's just don't like when it's done so poorly. That's what drives me bananas. Drives me
mhm.
bananas.
And
Um,
then they gaslight us and say, well, what we're doing really is Tolkien, and just the way they
Uh,
just talk down.
Yeah, and I said this in my latest video where I was just so annoyed with them telling like it's all about me, 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 right? When they say they go back to the books, I realize what they really mean is they're just grabbing things from the books and just throwing it in there, and it becomes this sort of sloppy stew of Tolkien where nothing really fits together. It's sort of like those horrible meat stews that have like chicken, beef, and shrimp and fish, and you're
No,
like, that doesn't really work, and it kind of comes out and nobody really likes it. And if you separated them all, it might have been fine. But here, that's what they're doing, right? So they're gonna just toss in the Barrow-wights, and they're gonna pick out Tom Bombadil and toss him in. And now they took Galadriel and they just tossed her on Numenor. And so they say by back to the book, they always just mean we're just gonna grab something from the book and throw it in here. And it doesn't work unless it fits together. And Tolkien made it fit together. And this
Mhm.
whole argument that they couldn't do it over the hundreds of years that Tolkien had written it, and I'm like, I think that would have made it far better to have the
Mhm.
elves live, and you take 10 years or so in one season, or 5 years, or however long it ends up being, for these seminal events that you have to go over, whether it's the creation of Numenor, or sorry, the creation of Barad-dûr, or the creation of the Rings of Power, and then the surrender of Sauron, right? All these moments, and then the destruction of Numenor. You could have these whole seasons that hit these high notes at the end of it for leading into the next season, until you have like the destruction of the ring or something, or not the destruction of the ring, but the death of Sauron, the banishment. I don't know what you call it. He's not
Yeah,
dead, but
whatever happened, yes.
whatever
The
you want to
big
call that.
battle, that would be so
Yeah.
awesome. I would
And
so watch that.
right, and maybe they were like, well, we'd have to hire new human actors for all those seasons. Like, yeah, but how interesting that would have made it for the elvish characters, for the elven characters that have to deal with them, and they realize like this is now the Galadriel was speaking with with El Ross. I was trying to remember. Okay, with El Ross, who was the first king of Numenor, and then she's speaking with his far progenitor Elendil at the end, right? And so they have a relationship, and she has to like, how does that work in her mind? And that would have made it far more interesting. But they don't have the writers that are capable of understanding that, or writing something that is as interesting for us viewers, that would bring us into those characters and their mindset in that. I think that would have been far more interesting than making Mithril a yin yang, light dark,
Oh,
that repairs Middle Earth apparently.
yeah,
Um,
with a lightning bolt or
yeah,
something.
it's sadly the midi-chlorian of Middle Earth now. That's
Yeah,
what Mithril has become.
yeah,
I don't know. Is
very good.
that's yeah, that's always on my mind. Is like, I still want good Tolkien. We're just not getting it because the people who have the licenses are just so poor. They're just so poor in ability. They're poor in spirituality. They have no skin in any game here, and so we're not going to get anything excellent for a long time. Maybe until The Hobbit or the Lord of the Rings enters public domain. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
that yeah. Well, some fan films have been far better than what we've been seeing lately.
I know.
Maybe that's where that can
Yeah.
happen. Well, I'll tell you what, I think it's very telling that out of all of this, they don't have Celeborn in there.
Still,
That's her
is he?
husband.
I can't remember. Isn't he supposed to be in the season 2? I only read the news, and that annoys me. So I don't know. I think he's supposed to be in it. Didn't they cast him? I don't remember.
There was a big rumor, and then allegedly they were fake leaks. It was a big brouhaha. So apparently he is not going to be in it. Now, that means he's safe, but having Galadriel without her soulmate, that's not Galadriel either.
I know.
It,
Yeah.
oh
Yeah.
dear, what a mess.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, we're going to go into the roll 7 for those of you that are used to this. We play along, that you may play along in the chat. We have 7 questions open-ended, and I roll my D&D dice. I am becoming a D&D nerd. So here we go. All right. So tell me something on your bucket list.
On my bucket list. Okay. I want to so I live in Middle Tennessee now. I grew up in Pennsylvania, lived in California, met my wife, had a few kids there, and now we live in Middle Tennessee, just south of Nashville. And
Mhm.
my goal, and so I have a good friend So the way I started the podcast, just real fast, is that I was on the Babylon Bees Lord of the Rings podcast back in 2021. And then I was in the first half of it. And then when I actually moved to Tennessee at that point, a friend of mine who was in a Chestertonians group named Michael Grumbine took over and was in the last half of it with Kyle and Dan from the Bee. And good friend, owns a cigar shop. I love going out on my back porch, smoking a cigar, reading, maybe watching some show that I have, an old show that I've never watched before, a movie or something like that. So I would love, on my bucket list, is to have a place where I can go to in a remote house that we live in, where I can go on my back porch and not hear any cars or planes or sirens or anything from the world, and just sit there and enjoy nature. That's on my bucket list.
Oh,
To live in the middle of nowhere, but still I gotta have a fast internet connection. That's the problem.
perfectly. Yeah, that's what I always say. I always say I would love to be a hermit with the internet.
Yeah, and that's my job. I mean, that's my day job. I've been building and doing marketing and design for 25 years in websites. So I kind of have to have it.
Yeah, understood. All right, we have what is the title of the current chapter in your life?
Man, you should have sent me these earlier. I would have made it really pithy and good. Let's.
Well, part of it's the spontaneity of it. I just rolled a dice.
No, I know. I hate being like I probably prepare way too much for our podcast. It's enjoying treading water. I'm enjoying life, but I kind of feel like I'm treading water right now. Like just kind of we moved here and all my kids, I've got 14, 12, 10, and 8, and where they're homeschooled, and so life is very busy. I do the Lord of the Rings stuff, which isn't a full-time job, but it's sort of an outlet, and I've enjoyed it for 25 years, and I will continue to do that as long as I can. I have a day job that takes me 40, 50, 60 hours a week, and then I have a couple other businesses that I run to, so just a lot of treading water. I do it all from home, and it's really enjoyable. But I enjoy sometimes treading water. Sometimes you get a little closer to the water, sometimes you get a little higher, but right now that's where we are.
Okay, cool. Let's see. Ooh, if this was a game, you just rolled a 20.
Oh,
what
nice.
Fictional character? I don't know if it's a critical hit, but it says, what fictional character do you wish were real?
Ooh. What fictional character do I wish were real? Now, is this real in the world that they live in, or that I could be in too, or is this real in the world of today?
Real in the world of today. So I'll just put Jean Valjean out there. Like, you really wish Jean Valjean were real and hanging out with him.
Wow. These are questions I've never really thought of. Picking a Lord of the Rings character just seems so on the nose. I have to try and find something else.
Yeah. Actually, I wouldn't mind Jean
Valjean. I'll say Batman. I've always loved Batman just because he's like, he's the good guy who's not a real superhero, but he does the right thing. We'll say the original. We're not going to say like where they're going with Batman and Martha, but we'll say Batman. It's totally out of left field, but Batman. I'd love to be in the world where Batman's real. Not the Joker, just Batman. So he can take out, he can take out the sniper who tried to take Trump out.
There you go. Yes, amen for Batman. So what's the worst piece of advice you've ever been given?
The worst piece of it, follow your heart. It's the dumbest thing. Don't follow your heart. Your heart lies to you all the time. Your heart is important and it makes you feel, but if you're not using your head, you're always making really bad decisions for yourself. And the reason I think about this is, so we, in my day job, which is building websites, designing, marketing, we have a few employees in my business. And when we hire out of college, we've hired a lot of designers in the past. And a lot of them should not be designers because they followed their heart. And they wanted to be an artist, and then when they're put up next to people who are real artists who really can do this, it's clear they shouldn't do it. And I love, who Mike Rowe is of Dirty Jobs. He once said, don't follow your passion, which is kind of the same thing as don't follow your heart, but bring your passion with you. And so be passionate about whatever it is you're doing, and your mind shifts. Right? It's sort of like fake it until you make it in a way, or or love is an action and not a feeling. That you can't, if you keep following your heart, you're just going to be making dumb decisions. You have to use your head, and you have to realize that what's best for you is probably not just what your heart's telling you.
Good one. I if I hear that ever again, I'm gonna lose my crap because I completely agree with you. What's your favorite ridiculous excuse when you're late?
Oh, I'm never late. No, that's a joke.
Oh, if you were late.
Favorite ridiculous excuse. How about well, it wouldn't necessarily be out of the ordinary, but I was still rocking out in the car, and I could just kind of got stuck. I still like listening to my old 80s 90s metal music that I have a good time with. So maybe that.
Yeah, there you go. You were too busy following your heart.
That's right. But yeah, well, I wasn't following it. I was just diving into it for a little while before my head took over again. I was just air drumming too much.
There. Oh dear me. What's the most immature thing you do?
The most immature thing I do, play with my kids in the pool nearby. We'll go there, and we'll just be super silly and do, like, throw each other around. They'll try to carry me and pick me up and do stuff. And so I'm enjoying that. Like I said, treading water. What a good callback. But I'm still enjoying, like, just doing silly things with my kids. I tell, it's hard not to tell dad jokes being a dad to four. And so I do that a lot. But that we have good silly times in there. It's a good outlet because I don't get a whole lot of silly time during the middle of the day, but at night I can kind of I don't know, pull back the sleeves and let things hang out a little bit.
Oh, cool. And last but certainly not least, the question is, where do you feel most out of place?
I'm an introvert, meaning, I get energy from being by myself.
Mhm.
I don't mind speaking with people, but I am not a good salesperson. I feel like I'm always trying to put one over on other people. And so both from, like, getting people to, hey, click subscribe, blah, 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 do that. I'm like, I always feel like so weird and smarmy. Or if it's in my, what I've been doing for 25 years too, in my day job, doing internet websites, marketing, stuff like that. I have a business partner who does sales, and every time I'm in sales, I'm never strong enough. So anytime I'm in sort of a sales situation, whether it's like a small crowd of people or something like that, I just feel so uncomfortable, and, like, I can put on the role, but man, I'm not a salesperson who's like, sign the dotted line, click subscribe, click the bell. That's just not me. It just feels weird, so uncomfortable.
Okay. Well, I have done that for you then. I
Thank you.
anticipated this. I am a psychic.
There you
Please
go.
sub to Jonathan at the One Ring, theonering.com, and Exploring Tolkien, and the website. I did put that up earlier. And if you don't already follow him on Twitter, it's at TORC.
RC.
So,
Yep.
so please, and this has been fantastic. Look at this. We had exactly an hour, and we are going to be closing in
Dang.
on an hour. Is there anything in particular that's coming up that you have going on?
Well, yeah. I mean, check out the podcast. Just look up Exploring Tolkien anywhere. You'll find us. And
Mhm.
we're reading through The Hobbit right now. It's a lot of fun. We're actually, what I love is there's a book called The History of the Hobbit that was published 18 years ago, I think it was. So before we did the podcast, so we was only doing the podcast 2 years now. But it actually has it's the only place you can get the copies of the rewritten Hobbit from 1960. And so this week we're going to be looking at what Tolkien changed in his attempted rewrite of The Hobbit, where he did 3.5 chapters, I think it was, of The Hobbit. And it's so weird. It's so different. Like, the whole good morning conversation with Bilbo is not
Yeah.
there anymore. It's so different. And so, yeah, check that out. And then, follow on YouTube. Michael and I are going to, as soon as the War of the Rohirrim trailer comes out, we're going to do a live reaction review of the trailer, what we think of it. We're not going to watch it. We're going to watch it together for the first time. We've never really done this. I'm like, oh, well, let's see what we think together about how bad this movie is going to be, because I like I said, I'll expect the worst and hope for the best, but I expect the worst for something like that. But yeah, check us
Yeah.
out. Exploring Tolkien, you'll find us everywhere.
Yay. Okay, do that and follow me here and watch on Miss Martin Muses, where I talk about what makes me laugh, makes me cry, makes me happy, making me sad, or just really ticks me off. We got House of the Dragon coming up, and I will be also covering the Rings of Power and the War of the Rohirrim. Also, the next pub crawl will be with Rev Kev. We don't have a date right now, but we are going to be discussing Dragonlance. So if that's the kind of thing you like, please go ahead and do so. And we have some Tolkien language here. Waves a paw. I am not going to try to say it, but I'm sure it's something very nice. I am not fluent in that, but thank you, Snortapoopy Scribber, and everyone that has been here in the chat. Okay,
Thanks for
have a
having me.
great day. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Have a great day, everyone. Have a great day, and be certain to read the books. Read the books of Tolkien. You will not regret it one little bit.